Right, a couple of questions for you from Sitowise before we get into the questions from the audience. I'm interested, you've had a number of acquisitions over the last couple of years, and we've talked so much about collaboration over the past few days. How easy has it been to collaborate while these acquisitions have been going on?
Well, of course, it's always a challenge because for people, acquisition is a change. You get, especially for the people who come from the company that is bought by Sitowise. But then it's always also a possibility when you get like new people, new ideas, new ways of working, new kind of like ideas. But that of course means that the company culture needs to be so that we are not like, okay, this is how we want it this to go. We don't listen to you. You come, we suck you in, and you need to do what we tell you to do. And for Sitowise, because it has been part of our histories for so long time, it is pretty natural. It is a pretty good way of working that we have there. Or how do you see that?
Exactly, and kind of to support this, we trust in the people, but we also want to equip them with good tools. And whether it's about kind of design software or company software, we've developed our own intelligent integration layer, which kind of integrates the systemic things or our guidelines on how to do the expert work, or actually how we use the tools at hand. So you have all that basis that you can dive into and get that support for the everyday life in Sitowise. And then again, you have the time to be the expert, the valuable expert, right? To concentrate on actually solving the problems, not managing the kind of duties, tasks in the everyday.
Yeah, you shouldn't create a monster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you found it fairly smooth to develop a common understanding on new sustainability targets and visions for the future?
It needs work, always. You need to have time to create that culture, but once you understand that and start working towards that on the different levels of the organization, then it hopefully goes smoothly.
And it is. It's not easy at all. I think that you need to force a bit. But then when you force the kind of that and the change starts, then of course when you have an expert company where people are like really pride and they have like really good ideas, that you need to push a little bit, and then they start thinking about themselves. Yeah.
Theo, you also talked a lot about making sure that sustainability is part of the process from the beginning. As an outsider, it's kind of quite surprising that it isn't always like that, because we've heard so much about how it should be like that. So what are the main challenges still for making sure that that's front of the agenda?
I think the challenge has been, this is like not a new challenge, it's how do you make money at the end of the day doing this, right? So I think companies in the industry struggled of how to build an ROI that makes sense, and a tangible, measurable ROI. So I think we're on the cusp now, and I think there's obviously, nobody likes to be forced to do something. You want to create positive anxiety in the supply chain, and I think that's what's going on right now. So I think that's the difference. I would say today is people. I don't know anyone that says I don't want to be more sustainable, or I don't want to, produce less carbon. I think everybody wants to do it. It's how do you really enable it to happen in a positive way that's not a detriment, to the way businesses operate.
Yeah, clashing with other values and other goals. Interesting question for Matti that's actually come in from an audience member, kind of related to this. Matti, what do you think would create the most unrest in society? The measures needed to keep us under 1.5 degrees climate change, or the effects of a 1.5 degree warming? Because, as we've been hearing, people say they want sustainability, but sometimes there is a bit of uncertainty and anxiety.
Super good question. I would maybe approach it so that in the short term, there is more unrest in the measures that we need to apply if we wanted to keep the warming below 1.5 degrees. But gradually it's going to change. There was just a recent scientific survey about how young people are, how they're feeling about their future and climate change. And there is a high level of, unfortunately, anxiety in those countries that are already experiencing the impacts of changed climate. So there is a shift towards the unrest due to the already changed conditions. I think we are living on that change at the moment.
Thank you. Another question from the audience to Theo. How does all this data that you've been talking about affect the climate in the world? And I'll ask Matti to pick up on this afterwards. This person says, one click seems to trigger a lot of computer and server energy. And as you mentioned, only a fraction of that data is used.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, data centers, which we're building, and I think actually there's an article this week in the paper around the amount of energy data centers produce from, especially a lot of the big tech companies, is a contributor of the problem, right? So I think we're in this weird place where we have to, figure out how to optimize the minimalization of energy that gets used by the data centers, but then the optimization of the data that we do actually generate already. So if you think about that number, that it's not an Autodesk number, I think the company was FMI, was the research company that did that work. If we could get from 95 down to 50, that's going to have a huge amount of reduction in the amount of energy we use in data centers. So I think, but I also think as you start thinking about AI and machine learning, yes, it's going to generate more power, but the amount of optimization that we're going to drive to get to a better outcome sooner is kind of foundational to what building information modeling is all about. So like anything, I'm a firm believer it's about balance. It's how do you find the right balance between spending more energy here but reducing over here. And the hope is it's a reduction, not an increase at the end of the day.
Matti, let's get you to pick up on that, because we always have these sorts of questions in sustainable development debates. If we do this in sustainability, will that affect that? So what particularly do you have to add in terms of data centers?
Yeah, well, I think it's about the net balance, the net benefits that count by the end of the day. It appears that we truly need the data centers and their capacity for solving problems. But maybe a good question is that how much of the energy consumption of data centers is driven by other needs than solving the global problems? I mean, it's cool to browse videos and listen to music online. But what is the quota of energy going to that instead of going to solving the global problems? And of course, if the built environment could release some of the clean energy or any energy for the service of data centers who are truly there to solve the global problems, that would be great. And therefore, we as construction professionals could play our share so that we can, release some of the energy from the built environment to valuable data processing needs.
You.
There's one thing I want to add.
Absolutely.
I think the thing we should also think about is that computing power is not free, right? So there's going to be a forcing function, and I can tell you as a company like Autodesk, we are constantly looking at our cost of using, the computing, Amazon web services. So if we exponentially create data, that doesn't come for free. So there is going to be kind of a financial cost-benefit analysis that we're going to have to think about, and I think in the industry we're already talking about triple bottom line cost benefit analysis on projects. So there's other things I think in play as well financially that will hopefully drive us to the outcome we want.
Sami, you're nodding a lot. Did you have something to add as well?
So maybe kind of also at the same time kind of combining these two answers is to kind of have this systemic approach, systemic thinking behind this, kind of actually modeling the different impact chains, whether it's from software providers or software users. We need to understand our position in the value chain in kind of emitting in the world. So this is something that we need to constantly monitor and assess together, and then work together kind of how do we change our workflows, and maybe there's something us users do wrong with the software, right, that generates these emissions. So to have this kind of systemic approach.
Excellent. We've also had some questions from the audience about existing buildings, which I think is really important, because of course we're going to need to build new buildings, but how do we modernise the ones that exist in a sustainable way? So this person asking the question says, what are your thoughts on CO2 emissions from existing buildings and facilities? How do we reduce energy and resource consumption? More than 60 million buildings in the EU region require modernisation, says this messenger. Matti.
Yes, I agree. This is a huge challenge. So energy efficiency is key when it comes to the existing buildings. But we can improve energy efficiency through a number of different means. And there we need to do it in a life cycle approach. We need to analyze the life cycle impacts so that while trying to save energy, we are not actually creating more upfront emissions for that purpose of trying to save energy. So according to some studies, say in Sweden, it can take over 30 years to amortize the energy invested into an energy renovation than you gain from lesser energy use during the improved performance of the building. So I think that life cycle approach and life cycle assessment is truly essential in this quest.
Sitowise, I'm guessing you might want to pick up on that.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I have had the privilege of working with Matti and the Ministry of Environment on this task, Energy Performance of Buildings Directive and the renovation roadmaps of Europe that have been already for quite some years preparing us for this. At the same time, one point of view I would like to make is that we need to make this as simple as we can to the people, the citizens, to understand this, and there our industry has had this kind of ideology of how do we produce things, but actually we need to take into account how people like to consume things, and kind of having that commercial mentality for the sustainability issues as well. How do we make that information easy to understand, easy to act on it, and there's some improvements that we need.
I guess that's your job. How is it going?
Yeah, I think that here is one really interesting thing, because if we talk about to consumers, usually when we talk about sustainability, we talk about clothes and food and things like that are like in our everyday life, because it's easy to understand. It's easy to understand that I don't buy that kind of jacket, that it's not sustainable, and these kind of things. But then but then when you talk about buildings and technical stuff, people don't really understand that if they, for example, if they really want to make a difference, they would go to a housing cooperative board and make a decision of energy renovation in their building. That's like a huge thing that they could do in their everyday life, huger than the coffee that they buy, for example. So I think that this is something that we should try to, as Sami said, make people understand, and then when they understand, they are ready to also contribute themselves and not think that there are just like big companies making this change.
So it's not just necessarily about making money, it's actually finding ways to save money if you can make buildings more efficient in the future. A couple more questions coming in for Theo before we wrap this up. Technical one: has Autodesk any plans to support open standards for data sharing, for example BCF, BIM collaboration format, documents, API and IDS, information delivery specification?
I mean, the short answer is yes. I mean, what I would say is the interoperability standards that we support generally are market and customer driven. So if we have enough customers asking for it, we'll normally do it. But yes, and then in addition to that, when I talked in my presentation a little bit about kind of our former platform, we actually have what we call fluid data exchange, and we already have other ways to better interoperate, and some of those we can build, or other third parties can build them themselves. So yes.
Yeah, and you have talked a lot about how you've been working to connect teams on a single platform, but it hasn't been a completely smooth journey. How are you navigating the challenges and measuring the success of the shift?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like everything. If it was easy, everyone would do it, right? So I think we're continuing to learn as we go through this kind of process, and that's what drove a lot of the interoperability agreements, even with our competitors. I would say, I'd say if I think about like as an example, Esri for us, that was very much a learning process, because it's different types of data, and you have to make like very clear decisions about what problem are you solving. And I think sometimes we focus on solving everything without really being very clear about what the problem statement is. So I think what we've learned going through the process is be very deliberate about what the problem is and focus on solving that problem and not solving every problem. And that's generally how you move forward. But I don't think, if you don't have some positive anxiety in the system, and I think you talked about it, then nothing changes. So you've got to find that balance, and I subscribe to the go fast, fail fast, kind of methodology as well.
Thank you. And final question to Matti. If you could give one piece of advice to, we've got some students in the audience, what would that be? And likewise, what would your advice be to the decision makers? I mean, we know there's a lot to change, so that's quite hard to just give one answer, but first steps in moving forward.
So an advice to students would be that in construction industry, in every project, there are so many possibilities of doing good, that I think that we should really embrace that opportunity and not try to solve the whole world in a single project, but identify the lowest hanging fruit in the project and go for those. And then for policymakers, I think that unfortunately we must have stronger regulations. We are very short on time in avoiding a global climate disaster. So the markets are developing and the leading companies are taking very good steps, but everybody needs to get on board, and therefore, unfortunately, we need to regulate stronger.
How does the corporate world feel about the regulation situation? Sitowise?
I think that regulation is good. We just need to understand it a little bit better before we know how it affects. But as said in the presentation, I think that we need to kind of like, for example, from reporting point of view, we just need to do, and then we need to learn, and then at some point we don't just report, we also kind of like change our ways of working because we want to report better things.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My background is outside of built environment actually, and something that we need to have in mind is that we need to be more vocal when these legislations are prepared. Some of the other industries are quite well present in those discussions, and when it comes to sustainability or even digitalization of the built environment, we need to be more present as companies in those discussions, because the European Union, for example, provides that opportunity of stakeholder dialogue. So we need to take that opportunity and give them insight on how we act upon it. And what I've been following closely is the LCA calculation methodologies across Europe, and there we have had that dialogue with companies of how that calculation method actually affects the experts' life when they are assessing emissions. Yeah.
Any final concluding comments from Theo?
I mean, I think it's the word I'm going to use is balance. I think we definitely need regulation. Mandates, always a strong word, but I think if we can find the right economics of scale, then that's when you're really going to see a shift, right? So it's and I think we all have an obligation, especially in the AEC industry. You become a civil engineer, as an example, because you want to make the world a better place, right? So if that's a core value that we have, then we should practice what we preach, right? So I think it's at the end of the day, it's going to take balance across all these different mediums in order to drive change.
Great to get all of your input. Thank you so much. We do need to wrap that up because we're heading into a break. But please put your hands together for Theo, Sami, Minttu and Matti in Oslo. Thank you.